it may surprise you, it surprised me, that if you look historically, our work hours have been steadily declining. So this is tracing all the way back to 1870. The most recent data point for this is 2017. So you can see this steady decline. I will point out, though, that if you zoom in on, since 2000, it's pretty much a flat line. So we really haven't moved in the last couple decades. But what's really interesting is everyone that I talk to about this book, they're like, I can relate. I'm feeling like I'm working all the time. So, but this is not reflected in actual work hours. And so the conundrum is, well, what's going on? Why do we feel like we're working all the time? Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but I'm going to focus on technology specifically. Technology has played a big role in our work processes. So, for example, a century ago, scholars predicted we'd be working 15 hours a week due to technological advances, which is so interesting. I'm like, where did that go? But what ended up happening with technology is as we were able to do things more efficiently and more quickly through the use of technology, what we ended up doing is adding more to our plate. And so the myth, again, is that so as work hours increases, that productivity would increase along with it. But what he actually finds is that, sure, to some extent, working longer hours is a good thing, but we reach our capacity at some point where after that point, we are still working more hours, but our effective hours starts to go down. So what is effective hours? So effective hours is the amount that you're actually accomplishing things when you're working. So it's one thing, too, for this to level out and be straight. Like you get to a point, you're still working, but you're not making any progress. His model shows that it actually declines. So this means, and he finds around 55 hours a week is like the peak for a lot of people. And so after this peak, the more hours we work, the less productive we are. Not just that we're not productive, we are less productive. So the first component is motivational. Individuals that have more workaholic tendencies feel what is described as almost like an inner pressure to work all the time. Being idle is uncomfortable. Some people describe it as almost like a pit in your stomach. That's how I feel. If I try to relax and take the weekend off, it has to be intentional for me to not pick up my work because it feels very uncomfortable to me. So this inner pressure is a big component of workaholism. The second component is work rumination. So this is thinking about work all the time. So you could be thinking about something that happened that day, worrying about something that's going to happen tomorrow. Some of the people I talked to, this was so bad that it prevented them from falling asleep. One woman woke her up in the middle of the night very often, and to the point where she couldn't go back to sleep. So guess what? She just got up and started working. She just couldn't calm her thoughts. Another woman, her doctor basically diagnosed her as having non-restorative sleep due to this cognitive rumination. Sleep is very important to our health. I'm sure we're all aware of that. And so when this work rumination interferes with things like sleep, it can cause some real health consequences. The third component is negative emotions. Along with this inner pressure to work, this feeling like, oh, I ought to be working right now, comes negative emotions. This can be anxiety, this can be guilt. You feel guilty taking that time off for a vacation. You can feel frustrated if people in your family are, bugging you when you're trying to work, even though it's family time. these negative emotions are all interweaved with this compulsion, this inner compulsion to work. And so this is extremely detrimental. And the most obvious component is the behavioral component. Yes, people that have workaholic tendencies, they do tend to work more than what's expected of them, more than others. There's some, distinct things that you can kind of pick up in individuals that have these tendencies. They might work on vacation. I'm guilty of doing that in the past. I'm trying to be much better about that. Another thing, a very sneaky way to still work is what we call working light. So working light is basically interweaving work into things that are fun. When things are a crisis to us, I'm sure you've all heard of fight or flight, right? So that is physiologically what is happening to us. Our heart rate goes up, start sweating. We have tunnel vision. Fight or flight is meant to be able to survive, right? We have a bear coming towards us, and we really do need to focus on just the bear. But if we're in fight or flight mode all the time, everything's a crisis, not only is this bad for us health-wise, but it's bad for us business-wise. We have tunnel vision on the crisis. We have tunnel vision on really everything. Very backwards focused thinking is how Gabe described it. He called himself the big fear machine, is how he was as a leader. So these are like the everything's a crisis, frantic multitasking, emergency fighting leaders. But once he got his workaholism under control, he really tried to focus on just 5 or 6 truly important things on his calendar every couple weeks. And by doing that, it allowed him to be more strategic. That is one of the big advantages about really redefining what is urgent and what is less urgent, because then you can be more creative. You can focus on the big picture. You could focus on being that leader who's inspiring your employees rather than terrifying them and making them all anxious and burnt out. I do think it's super important to think about what you are rewarding. Are you rewarding pseudo-productivity, which is your input? You're simply just rewarding the input. But do you care about the input? Don't you care about the output? What you should focus on rewarding is client satisfaction, these tangible outcomes. What is the quality of the project that someone put together? If you shift the focus to the output, this is a whole movement, the results-oriented, work environment, and the 40-hour, 30-hour work movement, focusing on what people are doing much more than the input they are putting in. So if this is a leverage point, that could be another aspect to shift to focus. I wanted to talk about one thing called the cycle of responsiveness, and I realize this is probably pretty small text, but there's a book that's kind of old now by Leslie Perlow, another organizational psychologist, where basically, I think this is really an issue now coming out of COVID, is this idea that everyone has a smartphone, everyone is accessible, and if your organization has a culture of responsiveness, so people are expected to respond quickly, then you feel that you have to be on all the time. So you feel this pressure, and because of that, you adjust and you make sure it is possible that you're accessible. So now you've made yourself available in the evenings, on the weekend. But then people know to count on you being accessible. And then because they count on you, then you feel pressure to respond. And this cycle just continues to get reinforced. And so she calls this the cycle of responsiveness. And so one of the critical things is breaking this cycle.